Let's go to Jenna Julius, the Research Director of the National Foundation for Educational Research, the organisation which has carried out this research. Why do we still have school uniforms, Jenna, in 2023?
Good evening, Iain, and thank you for having me on the programme. So our research published today focuses on the impact of cost of living pressures on schools. And as you've rightly pointed out, what we find is that schools are taking unprecedented steps to support pupils given the cost of living pressures. And as we said, 87% of senior leaders in our survey told us that they were providing support to some of their pupils for clothing and uniforms. And I think the key thing here is that school uniforms, whether you support them whether you don't, this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the kinds of pressures that schools are having to contend with and the kinds of support that they're having to give pupils. And really, we can have a kind of at length debate about whether or not school uniforms are the right thing, but the crux of the issue here is that in order to kind of support schools with the scale of the challenges that they're facing now and the scale of challenges that we know that pupils and their families are facing now, we need to be looking much more broadly at bigger solutions, at looking at, in the short term, support for schools and families to contend with additional cost of living pressures, and in the medium term, look at solutions that go beyond the school gates.
But in a sense, the fact that 87% of schools are providing uniforms is a bit of a meaningless statistic unless we've got something to compare it against, isn't it? I mean, what was the percentage 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
So what we do know from our survey is we know that in terms of So we know that senior leaders are telling us that this is a big increase in terms of what they were providing in terms of the number of pupils who are in need of that additional support. So traditionally, you would expect that a lot of the support that schools are providing would be going to pupils classified as disadvantaged. Now, in a school context, disadvantaged pupils, we're typically talking about pupils who are eligible for free school meals. And what senior leaders are telling us is that the group of pupils who are in need of that additional support, who are being provided with things like uniform and clothing, actually goes far beyond that group who are kind of traditionally considered to be disadvantaged. So what we're seeing now is this is perhaps not new, some of the support that some schools are providing, but what is new is the sheer scale of challenge that schools are facing. And our concern is that without urgent action, the cost of living crisis is likely to be having kind of far-reaching and long-lasting impacts on pupils. Schools are having to step in because they have really little choice whether they have the resources or the staff to do so. They're seeing this pressing need, but the fact is that they don't necessarily have the resources or in some cases the kind of specialised expertise in order to provide this support.
But according to the report I've got here, and maybe you have got the figures to hand, I don't know, but so 87% of schools in England are providing uniforms, but I mean, to what percentage of their pupils? I mean, it's very different if it's 1% to if it's 10%.
Thanks, Iain. So it was around a fifth of pupils on average of the schools that were telling us they were providing support. That was the average proportion of their pupils they were telling us that they were providing that support to, which I think is really astounding. Obviously, that's going to vary across different settings. In terms of which schools are most affected, as you would expect, it's the schools with the most disadvantaged pupils, and it's also special schools who are already the schools that face the most challenging circumstances in terms of supporting their pupils, which is all the more reason why we don't put in place support now and action now. These pupils who already have, face a number of different barriers in terms of kind of their life chances are going to be even more impacted, and these issues we know are not going to go away. So while inflation might be easing, we know that the Office of Budget Responsibility is anticipating that living standards, as measured by real household disposable incomes, are set to remain far below current levels. Far below pre-pandemic levels into the end of the decade. So we've got a big problem on our hands that schools are having to contend with, and the reality is that problem is not going to go away.
Well, it would go away if we didn't have school uniforms, wouldn't it? Because parents would be free to buy whatever clothes they wanted for their children from wherever they wanted, rather than having to buy branded uniforms, which inevitably are expensive. And I mean, the fact is, for kids wearing adult sizes, there's VAT on school uniforms as well. So, I mean, if you're not going to abolish school uniforms, I suppose you could take VAT off school uniforms.
Well, Iain, I think no matter where you stand on school uniforms, I think the reality is any steps that are going to help some of the challenges that schools and families are facing to contend with cost of living pressures are obviously welcome. But as I said earlier, the fact is this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the sorts of needs that schools are seeing. So not only are schools saying that they've seen increased levels of kind of financial and welfare needs, as you might expect, but they've also been telling us that they've seen larger increases in well-being and mental health needs among pupils, which we know had already increased during the pandemic. And so clearly the solution to some of these challenges is going to go beyond uniforms. And any steps that we take in that area are going to help, but we need to be looking at larger solutions, looking at both in the short term, additional financial support both for schools and families, and in the medium term, look at that support kind of beyond schools. So we know that not only are schools currently contending with increased levels of need among their pupils, but they're also increasingly unsatisfied with the level of support that they're getting from external agencies, such as local authority services. So, for example, around a fifth of senior leaders in our survey said they weren't getting the support they needed from children and young people's mental health services. So this shows that cuts and resource pressures in other parts of the system are also impacting on schools. So schools have this double whammy where they're dealing not only with increased needs, but also the fact that they're having to step in to fill the gaps that are being left from elsewhere in the system.
Okay, Jenna, thank you. That's Jenna Julius, Research Director of the Nuffield Foundation for Educational Research.